Well, our guest speaker today is Harmony Stagg. Harmony is an Ayurvedic and integrative health practitioner who specializes in women's digestive health, hormonal imbalances, and weight management. The best adjective to describe her is the word optimizer. Harmony is someone who knows how to use all their abilities for the betterment of themselves and society. Throughout her research, she's made an attempt to comprehend the potential of combining Eastern and Western therapeutic regimes. It turns out that they complement each other. As a registered nurse and an Ayurveda practitioner, Harmony has made it her pursuit to bridge the gap between the systems of medicine. Her goal is to empower people to take control of their health and well-being. She truly believes that delivering her teachings in a modern voice is part of her dharma. I'm excited to bring Harmony because we've had such an exciting conversation regarding Ayurveda, and I'm really hoping you enjoy this as much as I did. Welcome, Harmony, to the Lifability Podcast. I'm really excited to have you on here today and talk all sorts of Ayurvedic things. Um, I want us to maybe start off with exploring, the doshas and whether that's something that we're innately born with or that kind of changes as we progress through our lifespan.
Yeah, absolutely. So you are right. We are born with a unique constitution, and that is our prakriti. And our prakriti is due to the fact that it's a different season that we're all born in, our mother and father's genetics, our mother's diet at the time of conception, the environment at the time of conception. There's so many factors that go into our unique prakriti. And so our individual constitution at the time of birth is like our Ayurvedic fingerprint. It's super unique. And then we have our Vikriti, which is our dosha that we as Ayurvedic practitioners will be working on, because that is the dosha that is the current state that we're in, and it is always fluctuating and always going in and out of balance, and that is due to a number of different reasons, because our doshas will be affected by our external and internal world. So that could be the environment that we're in. If it's a really, really hot day and we're been eating lots of hot food, we're feeling frustrated, like our pitta dosha might start to rise, and that's the dosha of fire. And so it can be influenced by the people that we hang around, the work, the job that we did. Like perhaps when we were younger, we were very creative and talkative and had a very high vata dosha, and that's our natural prakriti. But over time, we've suffered some traumas. We've been in a suppressive relationship, and we're in a job that we don't enjoy, and we might be inviting more of that the inertia into the body, and so we might have more of a kapha vikruti that we're treating. And so just looking at the doshas and what they actually are, there's three mind body types that Ayurveda recognizes as the doshas, and they're made up of the five elements. And the five elements are the fundamental sort of principle in Ayurveda. So the ether and the air element make up the vata dosha, and the fire and water element make up the pitta dosha, and water and earth make up the kapha dosha. And each of those doshas or energies have different qualities, or what we call gunas in Ayurveda, that represent different aspects of how our mind functions, how our body functions, and what they're responsible for within our mind-body complex.
So, from what I'm understanding, is we're born with a certain constitution, which is either a Vata type, a Kapha, or a Pitta. But then our environment and whatever's going on in our environment can also then influence those. And as we go through different experiences, you can either suppress or enhance one of those doshas. So the basis of Ayurveda is to try and return us back to our original constitution. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we have all three doshas within us. So we're born with all of them because we're made up of all of the elements, but they're in varying degrees. So that's what makes us have our unique constitution. And you're right, from there, because of our life's journey, it will either aggravate the one of the doshas or two of the doshas, and they become out of balance. We can
Mhm.
be dual doshic and we can be tridoshic as well, meaning that we could be more of a vata pitta, where a vata pitta is quite even, or tridoshic means that all three are even. And therefore, if one of those doshas gets aggravated, we become in an unaligned state with our natural constitution.
Mhm. So, if we're looking at, I guess, just the doshas itself, and for our listeners to understand what might be a type of each dosha, if you could, yeah, maybe give us some more information about that. But also, for example, let's say we're a dual dosha, like a vata pitta, but then our experiences influence more of the kapha type. So then we show or behave more in a kapha tendency, how do we then go back to the vata pitta, for example?
We always treat the imbalanced dosha, so the aggravated dosha. So by treating an imbalance or an aggravation of kapha, you'll naturally return to your natural state. There is a fundamental rule in Ayurveda: like attracts like, and opposites either balance or decrease themselves. So therefore, if we are imbalance with a kapha dosha and we're adding more kapha qualities like lacking motivation, we're sitting around all day at home, we're not doing a lot, we're secluding ourselves from people, we're not finding passion in our life, then we're only going to increase that kapha dosha. Whereas if we can bring in some opposite qualities like fire, we can bring in some passion, we can bring in some lightness, then we start to balance that imbalanced state of kapha. So just going back onto the different doshas. So we've got the vata dosha, as I mentioned, made up of ether and air. And the qualities of vata is it governs the central nervous system. So when vata goes out of balance, we can find ourselves very stressed and very anxious. We can have a lot of thoughts going on in the mind. We've got to think of like the qualities of ether and air. They're very, if we think of air, like it can be very changeable. The wind changes all the time, right? So vatas often are changing their mind or changing their thoughts. They can be very creative. They can be very social. They're often their body type. They're generally either quite small, little framed, or they can be tall but very like thin. And because of the wind element, it's very drying, so they can be prone to dry skin. The air element, they can be prone to a lot of like bloating and gas and constipation. So that's when a vata person is out of balance. When they're in balance, again, like I said, they can be very, very creative, very social, very intuitive. And there's a lot of beautiful aspects of the vata dosha too. But it is the dosha of movement. So often when we get out of balance, our vata sort of gets a little stirred up and out of balance, and then it can move the other doshas out of their natural balance state. So the pitta dosha is made up of fire and water. And when I look at the water element of the pitta, it's more of that heated, oily water. So a pitta person, they can be very driven, they can be very passionate, they make really good leaders, they're very logical, they can be very structured. When they're in balance, they can be very hot-headed because the heat rises. They can be get very frustrated. They can lead to burnout because they are the ones that often will overwork and are very high achievers, like that type A type of personality. They can get a lot of heat in the skin, so a lot of different skin issues, acne, the oiliness of the skin as well, a lot of reflux, regurgitation, that kind of stuff in the body. And the pitta dosha is really it governs the transformation in the body. So like our agni, our digestive system, our metabolic rate, the mitochondria in the cells, all those type of functions that generate heat and generate different aspects of the body is from the pitta dosha. And we have kapha, which is made up of earth and water. And earth, as we know, is like a very solid structure. It's very stable. So they're very stable people. They usually have a bigger bone, like a bigger bone structure, and kapha represents and governs growth in the body. So when they're out of balance, there could be excess growths on the body. Also, if you think about the water and the earth element together, when they are together, it creates cohesiveness and a bit of stickiness. So if there's like sticky phlegm in the chest, that's a buildup of kapha dosha going on. The kapha dosha, they can be very, as I mentioned, sturdy and stable and even, and they're very well received as friends because they're those people that you sort of always lean on. They've got that safety about them where you feel safe telling them your problems, and they can really hold you up in those sort of challenging situations, but at the same time, to the detriment of the kapha person, they can take on a lot of people's problems and then feel quite heavy and burdened from them, because one of the qualities of earth is like that heaviness. They, in the body, they can have more issues of fluid retention, so edema. They can put on weight a little bit easier. They can be the ones that are a little less motivated if they're out of balance, so they prefer just to sit, sit at home. It might take a little while for them to get going. They talk a little bit slower, whereas you can probably tell I'm not very kapha. I'm very vata. I'm talking with my hands. There's lots of movement going on. Yeah, so that's sort of, in a nutshell, a very, very brief overview of the doshas.
Yeah, and so I have quite a few questions just coming out of that. And I guess the first thing is, so if we're looking at mental health, for example, someone that is more on the anxious side, would you say that would be someone who's got more vata in them? And then someone who has maybe got like a bipolar diagnosis, would you say that's more on the pitta? And then someone with depression, for example, is more on kapha.
Yeah, yeah, it can present like that. I mean, it doesn't matter what dosha we are, we can all experience anxiety, but it'll present a little bit different. So a vata's anxiety will present like more fearful, more stress, those looping thoughts that constantly go around in our head. Whereas a pitta's stress and anxiety would probably be more of the I've got to do this, I'm not good enough, like this like over focused, that makes them really agitated, and they start to like get snappy and fiery and like annoyed with their anxiety, and it's driven by anxiety. Whereas the kapha, they can be anxious and stressed, but that'll turn into inertia and it'll turn into a more of a depressive appearance and depressive state where they're trying to the avoid the situation. So I guess if we're looking at from like the anxiety perspective, the bipolar one's interesting. Again, it can affect all doshas, but it's really that fluctuation almost of the vata, the very, very high, and the kapha. When we look at mental health, we actually look at the gunas of the mind. And so we're looking at a sattvic state, which is very like of purity and lightness, or a jasic state, which is like passion and moving forward and transformative, and then a tamasic state, which is that sort of lower energy inertia. And so from a bipolar perspective, it's sort of moving between rajasic, which is governed by pitta, and tamasic, which is governed by kapha. But then this gets very complicated for, I guess, a podcast if you don't know a lot about Ayurveda. But then you've got the vata moving those two states, so it's more of a tridoshic condition, if that makes sense.
I just wanted to tie in with, for example, someone experiencing trauma or haven't had some childhood adverse experiences. How much of that correlates with our constitution and because at the end of the day, trauma is the perception of the experience, right? And so, are we saying that, if we're a certain constitution, we're going to be predisposed to a certain way of being or feeling. It's like the chicken or the egg. Which one? Yeah, which one kind of influences what?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and you're right. The trauma can be is an experience, the way we perceive an experience, and therefore our constitution will have something to do with the way that we respond to that trauma and the way that we carry it through our life, and the trauma itself can also change our constitution. So our prakriti, our natural state, will have a will have impact on the way that we respond and react, but the trauma itself will change our vikruti, which is the dosha that we look at now, because that's the dosha that we're treating, the imbalanced state. And then it goes a little bit deeper into, yes, understanding the doshas, understanding the gunas of the mind, as I mentioned, sattva, rajas, and tamas. But then we, from an Ayurvedic psychology perspective, look at the different layers of the mind. So that from an Ayurvedic psychology perspective, the traumas that people have gone through are become samskaras. Samskaras are imprints left on our chitta mind, which is our subconscious mind, and then our patterning behaviors that are governed by those samskaras on the chitta mind is dictated by our hamkara, which is our ego mind, our like the logical mind that we start to act with, and that will present differently depending on our different dosha. So it goes quite deep. I hope that kind of like made a bit of sense. But we look at the different layers of the mind and how those traumas have affected those layers and how we're presenting. Because, like you said, a trauma response, it can definitely govern more of a very frightful, fearful state in people. It can make them be very stressed, very anxious. They want to run away from different certain things. They're constantly changing different aspects of their life because that kind of makes them feel comfortable. And that's more of that vata response. Whereas the pitta response is to be probably a little bit more self-critical, critical of others, very judgmental, very hard on themselves. Whereas the kapha response would be to be very withdrawn and to have a lot of like those deep sort of depressive emotions that they can't get out of bed, that kind of different presentation.
And so when you say the response, is that related to your constitution? So, for example, if your constitution is kapha, then you're more likely to go into that withdrawn, shutdown stage. Um,
If your mental constitution is more kapha, your mental constitution and your mental prakriti is more kapha, then you're going to have more of a tamasic nature, which is more of that withdrawal, that inertia, depressive state. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. And yeah, I guess it is very deep, and it's not just the doshas that we're familiar with. There's a lot more to that, and I guess that leads me into exploring Ayurveda as a lifestyle, because people that might know a little bit about Ayurveda think that it's about a certain diet or, going and getting certain body treatments, but it's a lot more than that. So could you shed some light on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, Ayurveda is, I mean, the word itself means the science of life, science and knowledge of life and longevity. And so it is a lifestyle, it's a preventative medicine, also a treating medicine. But one of the key aspects of Ayurveda is the lifestyle aspect, especially I work with in women's health, specifically hormonal imbalances. And a lot of the Ayurvedic lifestyle implementations that my clients take are life-changing for them, because we have moved so far away from our natural way of being that it has disrupted our endocrine system, our hormones, our doshas, all of those type of things. So an Ayurvedic lifestyle, I mean, one of the main things is we look at dinacharya, which is our daily routine, and the daily routine will be something that is going to help balance your unique dosha. So if you're more of a kapha constitution, for instance, then you may have the tendency, or you would like to sleep in late, lay in bed, have a really slow morning, have a have your cup of tea and then something to eat and sort of mosey on with the day, and then wonder why you don't have a lot of energy or motivation to do some other things. Like, you might take it naturally a bit slower. Whereas if you are a kapha constitution, if you woke up earlier, if you maybe started your day with breath of fire, so like igniting some fire or some movement, going for a brisk walk, you'll find that you naturally have more energy, because we're bringing in more fire practice into what is a natural earthy practice for you. Whereas a vata, if you're going to get up, have a shot down a coffee, run around doing a million different things, get the kids to school, go to work, you're going to be frazzled. And like, Vata's already that sort of state. So instead, a Vata should probably start their morning a little bit slower in that parasympathetic state. So it's really about adopting a lifestyle that's going to be conducive for your natural constitution. And that's why even when I teach my breathwork course, it's all about breathwork techniques that are going to support your individual constitution. And that's the same for your diet. There's certain foods that are going to support your individual dosha or your individual constitution. So that's what we look at with Ayurvedic lifestyle. And really, at the core of it, it's about self-awareness. So Ayurveda is just this huge journey of being very self-aware and learning what works for you and your body and mind and what doesn't, and how to bring it back into more of a balanced state by using that like attracts like, opposites decrease each other or balance each other out.
And so I can completely relate to what you're saying, but you know, there might be a listener here that's saying that's all well and good, but I need to get things done before a certain time. And that's just how life has to roll at the moment. And my constitution is Vata. What do I do?
Yeah. So again, we always make time for what's important. And if you're going to be, if you know that you're a Vata constitution and you're flying out of bed, having a coffee, and your days are just then chaos after that, well, you can keep going with that. But then you're just going to keep going with that, and you're going to become more out of balance. You're going to feel all the feelings that you're still feeling. If nothing changes, nothing changes. And, Vatas, they don't like rules. They don't like a lot of structure. They like a lot of that freedom. And that's fine, because when they're in a balanced state, that's a beautiful part of them. But if you're in, and there's nothing wrong, if you're balanced and you're doing that, that's fine. It's when you're in imbalanced state, if you don't change what you're doing, you're going to get the same results. So that's a bit harsh to say to people, but generally, if they come to see a practitioner, there's something that they want to work on. And if they're not willing to work on it, they're not going to get the results. But what I do is make sure that we can create a routine or a lifestyle that is going to be realistic for that person to subscribe to. So it doesn't have to be like, all these changes. It's not an hour-long routine. Like, it could literally be 5 minutes, a 5-minute routine, just to tap into your parasympathetic state of your Vata, and just to take a few moments to ground your feet. Could be like, you go outside the first thing in the morning, ground your feet on the earth, eyes closed, but gaze up to the sun to let the sun go on your face. And that's all of 5 minutes. But that little tweak can make a huge difference. It might be that you start with doing a very gentle breathwork practice or a mindful walk, whatever could work for that person. Because at the end of the day, we're all busy. We're in this modern world. We've got busy lives, and I totally understand that. And so we do want to have a dinacharya or a routine that's going to suit the individual person. But at the same time, we don't want to use life as an excuse.
And it's like you said, it's even just carving out 5 minutes or trying to wake up, 5 to 10 minutes earlier and just being still, or not even still, maybe even just using your senses to observe what's going on, right?
Totally.
Or going out, like you said, and putting your feet on bare ground for 5 minutes, and then you can, carry on and go and do whatever you've got to do. But starting off with some small habits that are going to make bigger changes over the long run is probably the key, hey?
Yeah.
And I want us to go into diet and potentially break the myth of what an Ayurvedic diet is, because a lot of people think Ayurvedic diet is a vegetarian diet. So, yeah, if you want to explore that with us a bit more, that would be great.
Yeah. So again, the like Ayurveda is a 5,000-year-old medicine, and there was different lineages within Ayurveda. And so the Brahmins that practiced Ayurveda, it definitely was a vegan diet, vegetarian diet, and so that's where a lot of that thought comes from. But there's many lineages that practice Ayurveda, and Ayurveda also has to be adapted into our modern world and to certain constitutions. So it's not necessarily a vegetarian diet at all. You can practice Ayurveda without being a vegan or a vegetarian. And for some conditions, like if they've got a lot of tissue weakness, they've got a large vata imbalance, then there are some non-vegetarian implementations that could be made in a medicinal way to support that person. So it's not specifically a vegetarian diet, but it is very plant based focused. And again, it comes down to the unique constitution, the doshas, and what foods are going to serve that person. I know for me, a lot of people, I've had a lot like, oh, I'd love to do Ayurveda. I'd love, love to practice it, but I don't like lentils. And I'm like, that's fine. You don't have to like lentils. We've also got to remember that we are bringing it into the West. We're bringing Ayurveda into this modern world. And we have to remember our own cultural aspects of what nutrition will look like to us. So we use the Ayurvedic principles, but we also have to adapt it to our unique culture.
And that also changes as the seasons change, right? So even though we might have a certain constitution and certain diet might be more beneficial for us, but at the same time, like if we're in, for example, autumn where there's a lot more wind and you're already a vata type, you don't want to be constantly having more airy foods, right? Uh, and if we're in summer for a pitta type, then again we're trying to balance that out, but at the same time, if we're in winter for a pitta type, it might not be too bad to have some of those foods.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is like a lot of the time when we're not so in tuned with our body or when we're first practicing Ayurveda, we're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. I thought I was being really healthy having like salad all the time, but I've always wondered why I'm so bloated. And they're a vata constitution. So they're having a lot of cold, raw foods that are harder to digest, even though they're healthy foods, but they also have a lot of the ether and the air qualities. And when we can transition them to have more cooked, warm, grounding meals, a lot of their gastrointestinal symptoms go away because they're bringing in more of that warmth, that nourishment, which their body is needing.
Mm. So if we can go a little bit deeper into the three doshas and try and unpack, some simple strategies that people can start putting in place to bring back balance. So if they're noticing that they're feeling a certain way, what are some of the things that they can do for someone that might not really know what their constitution is?
Yeah, so I do have a dosha quiz on my website, so you can go and work out what your Vikruti is. Whenever you do a quiz, it's going to be your Vikruti, your imbalance state, which is the one that we're working on. For a Vata constitution, they obviously their
So
qualities.
sorry, when you say a vata constitution, are you talking about the Vikruti then?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, because that's the one where we treat the imbalance state. So for a Vata constitution, their natural state will be, the ether air element. So they can have like the scattered mind, they can have the dryness of the skin. What we need to do is we need to bring in the opposite quality. So we need more warmth, we need more grounding. And so from a lifestyle perspective, things that are going to really slow them down because they're usually like all over the shop doing all different things, million different ideas. We need to like come back into the body. We need to slow them down. We need to ground them. And that could look like different things depending on that person. That's why we work one-to-one with them to find out the best routine for them. But for instance, it could be that a seated meditation is not going to work for them, even though that would be really good for them. It's not going to work because their mind's so busy. So sometimes I'll say, lie on the floor, put your legs up the wall and do a meditation that way, because that drops you straight into a parasympathetic state. Another one is to do a alternate nostril breathing, like a breath work technique that's going to get them focused on the moving the breath, the prana. One would be like a slow, meditative, really thoughtful walk, doing things that are going to be grounding for them. Then we would look at like different nutritional aspects. So I get, like I mentioned, with the salads and the cold foods, avoiding those and having more cooked warm foods. Having regular meal times is really important for vatas. Often they like to graze and snack and, you know, not have anything structured, but actually bringing structure back into a vata's life is going to really settle the central nervous system. Also, they can be very, as I said, social and talkative, but that will tire them out very easily and burn them out. And sometimes they're like, yeah, I'll do that, I'll do this, I'll do that. And they fill their calendar up. And then they are wondered why they're so depleted and exhausted. So really being mindful of how you schedule your life, like what commitments you've got coming up, and learning to say no to some things. That can be a huge game changer for the Vata constitution. For the Pitta constitution, they also will take on too much, and that's because they always have to sort of like, they're proving themselves. They have a lot of that fire energy within their constitution. So going and doing some activities in nature is really, really good for Pitta. Cooling activities, jumping in the ocean, going for a bit of a swim, and not making it competitive, because they're often the constitutions that will love competitive sport, but that can also sort of drive this heightened competitive nature. They're the ones in the yoga class that will be really striving to get to that peak pose, and they're not going to give up until they're in this peak pose, even if it means pushing themselves in that discomfort beyond what we're there to do. So it's really about coming back into their mind. It's about slowing down. It's about taking less judgment off themselves and just having more fun. So a lot of the time with Pittas, I'm saying, like, let's bring some more joy into your life. Let's just have fun without it having to be a structured sort of competitive environment in any way. And the foods and herbs that most suit a Pitta is something that's more cooling in nature. So some like cucumbers, some coriander, herbs, mint, they can all be wonderful foods to help support the Pitta constitution. And then we have the Kapha, where they have more of that earth element. So they're already very sort of grounded, chill people. We want to bring in more lightness. So with their meals, we do want structured meal times and to stop snacking all the time, but we want those meals to be lighter. Whereas a Vata would be more heavier foods, a Kapha would be lighter foods, still warm, but lighter. And for them, we want to get them moving, we want to get them energized. So we're going to look at a routine that's going to motivate them and inspire passion in them.
And so going back to the beginning of the conversation where you mentioned that, we're born with a particular constitution, and then that our environment and whatever happens in our environment determines what's out of balance. So what you've just said, you're talking about whatever's going on in our environment, and bring that back to balance. So how does that relate to then our innate constitution? So, for example, if we are in that kapha state and we're trying to balance the kapha, what's that got to do with what we were born with or as?
Yeah, so if you're more of a Vata Pitta, and you come to see me as the Ayurvedic practitioner and you've got a kapha imbalance, say you've got a phlegm cough, like a cough that's really phlegmy, you've also, it's been going on for ages, your immune system's low, you're feeling really fatigued, you just don't care about anything, really low motivation, don't want to see people, then we're going to treat the kapha imbalance, because that's how you're presenting. And by treating the kapha imbalance, which is your aggravated state, which is your vikruti, once we start treating that and it comes back to the natural kapha state of your prakriti, you'll come back to your natural constitution. because we're always treating the aggravated dosha. You can be a vata pitta, and you can often we see the aggravation of what your prakriti is, but that's not always the case. You can have a really aggravated vata. We treat that and it comes back to its more of a natural state. Therefore, all of your constitution is in more of a natural state.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, just going back to who we are and
Yeah.
balancing that out.
And some people lose that, like they lose that in adulthood as well. Like we do have these slight changes because like early childhood is actually more of a kapha phase of life because we're growing. Then we go into a pitta phase of life where we're acquiring assets, we're career driven, and then we go into a vata phase where we're aging, right? And that's like even from like the perimenopause to menopause, there's different phases of life that we go through. And so the constitution will naturally change throughout those different phases of life as well. But some people they can lose themselves because they've put themselves on a path maybe that's much more of they've gone into corporate. Say they're more of naturally a creative person and they thought they were going to do a creative job within marketing, but it happens to be it's very corporate and it's very managerial or whatnot. And it turns their path into more of like this sort of pitta path. They can often feel like it can affect sometimes their mental health. And that's when they'll present just feeling like disconnected from self, disconnected from purpose. And that's when we say, well, what were you more like when you were younger? What really lights you up? Like what's interesting? They're like, oh, I love drawing, love doing arts and crafts. And that's when we say, okay, well, you don't have to completely change your career. But how about, once a week or once even a fortnight, you find like an arts and crafts group that you can be part of, like bring in some of your creative side and your passion side so you're not neglecting it, or get up in the mornings and do some drawing, like do something that's going to challenge your creativity if you're not finding it in your professional job. So it brings you back more to your natural state of being and your natural mental state as well, and nurturing those aspects of self that are innate.
Amazing. And so it sounds like, a lot of the times when we're out of balance and we don't do anything about it, that's when disease manifests. And that's when, we get into this cycle of illness that just becomes chronic, right? But the more that we can try and balance that out, even if it's not within our immediate circumstances, just finding other ways to bring that in is going to help manage that.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And even like for a lot of my like pitta constitutions, us they're so focused on the rut of everyday life, and I'm like, well, what would you love to do? And they might say, oh, I would love to learn to surf. I'm like, well, that would be perfect for you because it's getting you in the water, it's doing something fun, a bit of adventure, getting you moving. And I'm like, okay, so your only job this week is to look up learn to surf schools and book yourself in for one. And it can just be such a game changer, those little simple things that we can bring into our lives just by knowing your constitution and starting to understand yourself a bit better.
Well, thank you so much. You've given us a little introduction to Ayurveda and understanding that whatever dosha is out of balance, that's what we're trying to manage so we can get back to you being in your fullest potential, I guess. So I want to finish off with three questions. The first one being, what can we do at a micro level to improve the future of holistic wellness at a macro level?
I would have to say work on yourself. To be able to work on a macro level, which is like supporting, well, even worldwide, is really going to start with yourself. Really get to know yourself, get to understand yourself. It's like in relationships, you always have to start with yourself. So really go inwards, ask yourself every day, like, how am I feeling today? That's just a great start of being able to come into your body, come into your mind, and asking, like, how am I feeling? And then how do I want to feel? What would that look like? Just start with yourself, I would say.
Second question being, what activity or occupation brings you the most joy?
Oh, I've got so many things that bring me joy. I do love going on water slides. Like, I know if I'm in a bit of a funk, I'll be like, oh, let's go to the water slide park or something. But I absolutely love going on adventures like overseas, holidays, traveling. That really lights me up with the family. Also, even solo travel, sometimes as a busy entrepreneur and mother, so I just love to even be on my own and go and do like a yoga retreat, that kind of stuff. That all lights me up. But what really, really, really has lit me up lately is I do a lot of online work, so I reach people worldwide, but I often bring them together in person in some events, and just having everyone connecting and sharing their stories through like how Ayurveda has transformed them, and just hearing that has just absolutely this year has really touched my heart. So I think, yeah, especially after the all those years where we were sort of locked away for a bit, I'm feeling like this in-person connection has been really amazing.
Awesome. And the last one being, if someone's got a chronic health challenge that they're facing at the moment, whether it's, mental health challenge or a physical challenge, what are 3 resources that you can recommend from an Ayurvedic point to start making a change in their life?
Yeah. So I have an intro to Ayurveda course. So if you don't know anything about Ayurveda and you want to learn more about the elements in your constitution and the diet that's going to suit you, I would say that's a really good resource to start, the intro to Ayurveda, because once you learn the knowledge, you can apply it to yourself like forever. Like, once you have the knowledge, you have the knowledge. And like I said, it's the science of life and longevity. I would also say Dr. Vasant Lad is a wonderful Ayurvedic teacher, and he has some really wonderful Ayurvedic textbooks. So if you wanted to jump into sort of deeper learning there, he has some brilliant texts on Ayurveda. And thirdly, I would actually have to say my podcast, Harmony Inspired Health, because I have so many amazing resources on there and episodes with different Ayurvedic doctors, Ayurvedic practitioners, myself. We talk about mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, women's health. And I've had a lot of women reach out and say, I found you on the podcast. I love that episode. Or, like, it helped me so much. So yeah, I would say off the top of my head, they're the 3 resources that I would go to.
Amazing. Thank you. If people want to find out about you, where is the best way?
You can go to my website, harmonyinspiredhealth.com.au, or come and say hello to me on Instagram, because I hang out there a bit. I am Harmony Inspired Ayurveda on Instagram.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Harmony.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, this is where your journey of exploration continues. Please subscribe to the Lifability Podcast so that you can stay tuned when new episodes come online. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. The mission at Lifability is to inspire you to create a more fulfilling life for yourself and improve your quality of life. So why not share this podcast with your loved ones and create a ripple effect together? Until next time, Asante Sana.